A billionaire woman went to visit her son's grave when she saw a black middle-class woman sitting in the corner with her child, crying. She was shocked. But then something happened that completely changed her life. Comment where in the world you are watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The November rain came down in a thin, needling veil that turned Greenwood Cemetery's rolling hills into a watercolor, gray sky, wet marble, black umbrellas like tiny moons. Victoria Blackwood, age 55, tailored black coat, cream leather gloves, moved along the flagstone path with the posture of a woman who never yielded ground. In one hand she carried white lilies, in the other the ache that had lived beneath her ribs for 3 years, ever since her only child, Adrian, died on a rain-slick highway outside New Haven. She stopped at the family plot, Blackwood, carved in a serif that money buys, and faced the newer stone, Adrian Robert Blackwood, 1994 to 2022. The city sounds were a far rumor back here. It was only the rain, the trees, the marble, and a small sound. Not the weather. A soft, hiccuping cry. Victoria turned. A young woman stood 10 yards away, soaked through in a diner uniform, a black dress, white apron, name tag turned backward as if hiding it could make her invisible. In her arms a little boy clung to her neck, his sneakers muddy, his cheeks wet. The woman's shoulders trembled the way people tremble when they've held it together too long and the body decides on honesty. "This is a private moment," Victoria said, voice level and precise, a scalpel more than a sound. "You're at the wrong grave." The woman lifted her face. Her eyes were swollen from crying, but there was a steadiness in them that didn't match the uniform or the rain. "I'm sorry," she said, breath catching. "I didn't know anyone would be here today." "Who are you?" Victoria asked, the boardroom instinct sliding into place, "and why are you crying at my son's grave?" The boy twisted in the woman's arms to look. He was maybe 4. He had bright green eyes, the particular green that had startled nurses when Adrian was born, the color Victoria had stared at for weeks because it was the one thing her money couldn't have engineered. The same green looked back at her now from a stranger's face, unblinking and curious, like a mirror held up from another life. "Jasmine Washington," the woman said, straightening as if saying her name reminded her who she was. She shifted the child to her hip. "This is Tyler. I work at Bell's Diner on 5th Avenue. We come here once a month." Something old and tight moved in Victoria's chest. "Why here?" "Because Adrian mattered to us." Jasmine's voice thinned for a beat, then found its center. "Because Tyler should know." The lilies slipped from Victoria's gloved hand. They landed face down on the wet stone with a soft, surrendering thud. Adrian hadn't had a serious girlfriend. Victoria had made certain, background checks, discreet tailing, an NDA here, a graduate fellowship there, the gentle, invisible corrections that kept the Blackwood name on rails. She had reviewed his life like a forensic accountant after the funeral, classmates, colleagues, calendars, every breadcrumb a grieving mind can demand, and found nothing that pointed to this scene, a waitress in a rainstorm, a child with his eyes. "Explained mattered," Victoria said, the word clipped. "Carefully." Jasmine held her gaze. It wasn't defiant. It was, exact. "Tyler is Adrian's son," she said. "And I promised his mother I would take care of him. Always." Silence laid down between them, heavy and clean as new snow. The only sound was the rain stitching the moment shut. For 3 years, Victoria had mourned like a general without a war, efficiently, privately, with a schedule. She had donated to the hospital wing that tried to save him. She had endowed a scholarship at Yale in his name. She had built an entire division at Blackwood Industries around a strategy he drafted the month before he died, as if the work would keep the grief in its lane. She had told herself her lineage ended with him, and she had learned to live with that fact the way people learn to live with chronic pain. Now this stranger was rearranging biology and legacy with a sentence. "A waitress," Victoria said, not quite to Jasmine, more to the weather. "And a child." She let her eyes move, ruthless as an audit, the scuffed shoes, the mended sleeve, the grocery store ring on Jasmine's finger that could be marriage or could be protection. Why did my son never mention you? He didn't mention me, Jasmine said quietly. He mentioned Tyler's mother. Then where is she? Victoria's voice dipped. If what you're saying is true, where is the boy's mother? Jasmine's jaw tightened, one small tell. Gone, she said. Since the day he was born. For facts flared at once in Victoria's mind, no birth certificate had ever crossed her desk with the Blackwood name, no trust had been opened, no rumor had reached her about child support, and those eyes, those impossible green eyes. Behind the steadiness in Jasmine's look, Victoria saw something else now, caution, and beneath it a calculus. This young woman had weighed answers before she came here. She had chosen to stand on this ground, in this rain, at this exact stone, not because she was careless, but because she was ready to be seen. Why today? Victoria asked. Why now? Because Tyler asked, Jasmine said simply, smoothing the boy's hair the way mothers do without noticing. He wanted to see the place where Daddy sleeps. He's 4. He deserves truth told to him in pieces he can carry. The boy wriggled down and, with the solemn curiosity of children in sacred places, touched the bottom edge of Adrian's stone with 2 fingers. He sounded the letters out under his breath. Dre-an. Victoria had the absurd thought that she should correct his pronunciation, then hated herself for having it. She looked at the small hand on the wet marble and felt something rearrange in her chest, messy and unconsented to. She did not cry. She had outlawed that 3 funerals ago. Listen to me, she said, pulling structure over the moment like a tent. If there is any truth in what you've said, I will verify it. If there isn't, I will make sure you never set foot near this family again. Either way, you will not use my son's grave as a stage. Jasmine nodded once. I didn't come for a stage. She lifted Tyler, who had begun to shiver. I came to keep a promise. What promise? That he would be loved and safe, Jasmine said. Even if the people with power chose to look away. The line landed between them with a weight that surprised even Jasmine, judging by the flicker in her eyes. She hadn't meant it as a challenge. It sounded like one. Victoria retrieved the lilies, shook the rain from them, and laid them on Adrian's stone with the precision of arranging a deal. She stood very still, thinking not of the boy in front of her but of the boy she'd raised, how he had hated ties as a teenager and worn them anyway, how he had once told her he wanted to teach for a year and she had explained, with the best intentions money can have, that Blackwoods build things bigger than classrooms. Bell's Diner, she said at last. 5th Avenue. Jasmine nodded. Victoria looked at Tyler, at the green eyes that made memory feel like a physical thing, and then at Jasmine. You'll hear from me, she said. Soon. Jasmine shifted her weight, the boy's arms tight around her neck. I know, she said. There was no fear in it. Only certainty. Victoria turned and walked away, the rain finding the seam between her collar and her hairline and running cold down her spine. By the time she reached the gate, the shape of her next 48 hours had already formed, DNA. Investigators. Financials. Birth records. Everything. She did not notice, as she passed the Bronze Angel, that Jasmine was watching her go with a look Victoria had never seen aimed at her, not intimidation, not envy, not even anger. Assessment. As if the waitress understood something about the billionaire that the billionaire did not yet understand about herself. 3 years of grief had taught Victoria to live with endings. A 10-minute rain-soaked encounter in a Brooklyn cemetery had just taught her that some endings are prologues in disguise. The next morning dawned gray and restless over Detroit, as if the sky itself shared in Lydia's unease. She had barely slept a few hours, her mind replaying Aubrey's trembling words over and over, "Daddy gives me a special drink before bed." That sentence haunted her like a storm cloud, too heavy to dismiss. She sat at the kitchen table with a mug of untouched coffee, staring at the steam, trying to decide whether she was overreacting or if something truly sinister was unfolding. Aubrey came into the room, still in her pajamas, clutching her worn-out teddy bear. Her little face was pale, and her movements seemed slow, almost weak. "Mommy, my tummy hurts again," she whispered. Lydia's heart twisted. She knelt and kissed her daughter's forehead, realizing it felt hotter than it should. That was the breaking point. Lydia dialed her doctor's office, her voice urgent as she begged for an immediate appointment. Within the hour, she had Aubrey wrapped in a sweater and strapped into the car seat, driving through the drizzle-slicked streets. Her hands gripped the wheel tighter than necessary, her chest tightening with dread. At the pediatric clinic, the waiting room was filled with the ordinary chatter of parents and children, but Lydia felt completely cut off from that normalcy. She watched Aubrey slump against her side, her small hand resting limply in Lydia's own. The sight nearly broke her. Finally, they were called in. Dr. Margaret Fields, a seasoned pediatrician with a kind yet discerning gaze, examined Aubrey carefully. She pressed gently on the child's stomach, listened to her heartbeat, and asked soft questions. Aubrey, in her innocent way, repeated what she had told Lydia, that her daddy gave her a special drink before bed, that sometimes she felt dizzy, and that she didn't always remember what happened afterward. Dr. Fields's face hardened, though she kept her voice calm. "Lydia, I think we need to run some tests. Right away." Blood was drawn. Urine samples were taken. Aubrey whimpered but clung to her mother bravely. Lydia sat through it all, her nerves fraying as she tried not to let her daughter see her panic. When the results came back hours later, Dr. Fields closed the door behind her and sat across from Lydia with a grim expression. She explained that traces of a dangerous substance, a type of parasite often linked to contaminated food or water, but far too advanced to be from casual exposure, had been found in Aubrey's system. This wasn't accidental. The parasite was severe enough that Aubrey's organs were at risk of shutting down without immediate treatment. Lydia's ears rang. She clutched the edge of the chair, her entire world tilting. "What does this mean? How could she have this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. Dr. Fields hesitated, then said firmly, "Given what Aubrey told us, we have reason to believe she's being deliberately exposed to something harmful. We'll need to begin treatment immediately," but Lydia, her eyes met Lydia's, steady and grave. "This is also a matter for the authorities." Tears blurred Lydia's vision. She thought of Derek, his charming smile, his persuasive words in court when he demanded visitation rights, how easily he had convinced people that he was a good father. And yet here she was, holding evidence that her little girl's life was in danger. As Aubrey lay on the hospital bed receiving 4 fluids, Lydia sat beside her, stroking her daughter's hair. She whispered promises through her tears, "I won't let anyone hurt you again, baby. I swear it." But deep inside, she knew a storm was coming, one that would pit her against Derek in ways she had never imagined. That night, Lydia signed papers authorizing treatment while silently preparing for the next battle, not just to save Aubrey's health, but to protect her future from a man who had already crossed every imaginable line. By the time Friday rolled into Manhattan like a column of gray light, Victoria Blackwood had turned her private library into a war room. The century-old mahogany table was no longer a place for rare books, it was a landing strip for manila folders, investigator memos, and a legal pad covered in her hard, upright handwriting. On a sideboard, a silver tray held a pot of coffee that had gone cold twice. David Chun, her chief of staff and the only person allowed to see her uncombed, stood silently beside the window, tablet in hand. "Run it again," Victoria said without looking up. David swiped. Jasmine Washington, 27. Server at Bell's Diner, occasional shifts at a hotel bar in Park Slope. 1 bedroom in Sunset Park, clean rental history, no criminal record, pays on time. Community college for a year, then stopped. No listed family except an aunt in Chicago. The boy, Tyler, 4 years old. Pediatric visits check out. But, he hesitated. We still can't find a birth certificate. Not sealed. Not missing. Absent. It's as if the mother never existed. Victoria tapped the table with 2 fingers, the way she used to when junior bankers tried to bluff through numbers. Everyone exists somewhere. Keep digging. The secure line on her desk flashed. Her outside counsel. She stabbed the button. Richard. Victoria, said Richard Thornton, the partner who had bulldozed half a dozen scandals for her, and never once sounded rattled, until now. You need to know, Jasmine Washington retained counsel. Victoria let out a short laugh. A public defender? Spare me. Not a public defender, Thornton said. Morrison, Caldwell and Pierce. She went still. The name hung there like a gavel. One of the top 3 civil rights firms in the country. They did not take losing cases. They did not take small ones. On what planet, Victoria said, voice cooling, does a diner waitress hire MCNP? They filed a preventive petition in Kings County this morning, Thornton continued. Seeking an emergency protective order, plus a judicial warning that any attempt to remove the child based on socioeconomic disparity would constitute discriminatory interference with familial integrity. The judge is Marion D'Angelo. Victoria closed her eyes briefly. D'Angelo had written law review notes on equal protection before most judges were learning evidence. We push anyway. I'll move to quash, Thornton said. But this is not the ground we want. If. The house line chimed. David glanced at the caller ID and lifted his eyebrows. It's her, he mouthed. Jasmine. Patch it, Victoria said, and Thornton went quiet on hold. The line clicked. Ms. Blackwood, Jasmine said, voice steady and infuriatingly calm, you've been busy. So have you, Victoria replied. Enjoy your new attorneys. I imagine their rates exceed your monthly rent. Pro bono, Jasmine said. Quality help sometimes comes to people with a strong case. Cases turn on facts, Victoria said silkily, and my facts end with blood. My grandson will not grow up in a walk-up over a laundromat. I'm done indulging your fantasy of leverage. There was a soft rustle, then another voice joined the line. Amanda Torres, Metropolitan Journal. Professional, crisp. Ms. Blackwood, I'm preparing a series on procurement fraud and public corruption. We'd like to offer you an opportunity to comment before publication. Victoria's gaze flicked to David. He felt the temperature drop. You put a reporter on my private line. You put a price tag on my son, Jasmine said, the calm sharpening. We're both making introductions. Victoria disconnected without a word and stabbed the button for Thornton. They've engaged the press. I heard, he said. Victoria, don't threaten, don't contact her again. Let me move this to the courthouse where rules exist. Rules exist where money writes them, Victoria said. File whatever you need to file. When the call ended, the library fell quiet except for the soft tick of the mantel clock. David shifted. Ma'am, if MCNP is in, there's a reason. And Jasmine Washington, she isn't operating alone. Victoria picked up her pen. No one ever is. Across the river in a Sunset Park walk-up, Jasmine's apartment had shed its modesty for purpose. Bankers' boxes lined the wall, labeled in her blocky print, Adrian, emails, contracts, shell companies, Tyler, medical, photos/audio. A thrift store table had become a command center covered in tabs and timelines. Tyler colored dinosaurs at the coffee table, feet swinging in the air, oblivious in the blessed way 4-year-olds are. On the sofa, an elegant black woman in her 50s, silver at the temples, professor's poise, reviewed a stack of cases with a yellow pencil. The preventive petition is clean, she said. Narrow, precise, and fully anchored in precedent. She looked up and smiled. You did your homework. Aunt Helen, Jasmine said, exhaling for the first time that day, I did more than homework. Professor Helen Washington of the University of Chicago had flown in that morning, hand baggage only and the force of 30 years of teaching business law riding in behind her. Next to her sat Dr. Michael Chun from Columbia Law, a scholar of family law and civil procedure who had answered Jasmine's cold email 2 years ago and never quite left. Amanda Torres, the investigative journalist, closed her laptop and scanned the whiteboard on the opposite wall. It was a mind map of names and arrows, everything leading to Blackwood Industries printed in red at the center. The municipal contracts, she said, tapping a box with her pen. We now have 3 instances of bid rigging with the same shell vendor. Same P.O. box, different LLC names. Money bounced through Delaware and came back as consulting fees. Chain of custody? Helen asked. Better than some prosecutors, Amanda said. She nodded toward a blue crate. Adrian labeled the drives himself. At that, the room softened. Jasmine crossed to the crate and ran a finger over the label in Adrian's precise, oddly formal handwriting. To be opened if I can't. The first time she'd found it, in a storage unit he'd rented under a trust name, she'd cried so hard she couldn't breathe. Then she sat down and started reading. Michael flipped open a thin binder. On custody, we lead with the best interest standard, but we frame the equal protection issue so the court can't ignore it. We ask for a standing order, no contact from the Blackwood side outside counsel. CPS notification stays sealed unless they force it public. Jasmine nodded. We also ask for a restraining order. Her office meeting was a threat, no matter how politely phrased. Amanda's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. My editor wants art for the first piece. We'll blur Tyler. We keep his name out of it. Jasmine smiled at Tyler, who was making a stegosaurus purple. He stays a kid. That's not negotiable. Aunt Helen studied Jasmine for a long moment. You're ready, she said softly. I've been ready for 3 years, Jasmine replied. Every night shift. Every class. Every footnote. She opened a dressing drawer box and removed a neat stack of certificates, a paralegal credential, 2 years of transcripts from an ABA-accredited evening program, letters from professors offering research credit. Below them, a photo, Jasmine and Adrian shoulder to shoulder, laughing at something out of frame, and between them a young woman with pale skin and wary eyes. The woman most of this city had never heard of, and the one person whose name would soon change everything. Amanda, reading her face, didn't ask. Storytelling had taught her respect for timing. Clock check, she said instead. 48 hours. If Victoria backs off, we pause publication. If she pushes, we go live with part 1, The Cost of Winning, How a Fortune Courted Corruption. The custody framing sits in part 2. Michael closed his binder. In the meantime, we keep the court ahead of the paper. Judges do not like being scooped by column inches. Tyler padded over, held up his dinosaur. He's brave, he announced solemnly. Jasmine knelt. He's perfect, she said, kissing the top of his head. And he's going to be safe. That evening, Victoria sat in her office on the 62nd floor of Blackwood Tower, encircled by glass and a skyline that had always felt like an extension of her reach. Below her, the city frothed, above her, the sky lowered toward snow. We have options, Thornton said over speaker. We can challenge standing, attack her resources, argue stability. We can hire a guardian ad litem who will view your home as best-in-class care. We will do all of that, Victoria said. And we will remind the court exactly what a Blackwood childhood provides. David cleared his throat. With respect, ma'am, the court will also ask what a Blackwood childhood costs. Victoria looked at him as if seeing him anew. He didn't flinch. A notification slid across her screen, Metropolitan Journal requests comment. She dismissed it. Another ping, SEC inquiry, routine. She dismissed that too, even as a small muscle twitched in her jaw. When had the ground begun to feel less like granite and more like glass? Her desk phone flashed again, internal line from security. Ms. Blackwood, the head of building security said, "Someone's been photographing the delivery dock. Credentials checked out. Press, likely. Then make them leave." "Yes, ma'am," he said, and didn't add the part both of them knew, "You can push cameras off your curb, you cannot keep them off your name." She ended the call and stared at the city until it blurred. In the reflection, she caught her own face, composed as ever, but with a strange new edge in the eyes. It occurred to her, unwanted and unmistakable, that she was no longer the hunter in this story. She was being watched, assessed, placed on a timeline in someone else's apartment. She straightened. "David," she said, "draft a statement for when this turns public. Family matter. Privacy. Commitment to the truth. You know the genre." He hesitated. "Yes, ma'am." "And David," she added, softer and without turning, "find out how a waitress from Sunset Park convinces Morrison, Caldwell and Pierce to take her case." He nodded once and left, closing the door with a click that sounded like a seal. Victoria lifted the receiver and dialed an old number, one she hadn't used since the last time a problem wore a human face. "It's Victoria," she said when a man answered. "I need the kind of help you don't invoice." On the other end, a pause. Then, "Careful what you think you're buying." She hung up without replying and looked down at her hands, perfectly still on the blotter, except for the faintest tap of one gloved finger. 48 hours. Back in Sunset Park, the apartment lights glowed warm against the early dark. Jasmine tucked Tyler into bed, whispered a story about a brave stegosaurus who learned that the biggest thing in the forest wasn't the tallest tree but the truth. When his breathing evened, she sat at the table again with Helen, Michael, and Amanda. "We're not just defending," Jasmine said, eyes on the whiteboard. "We're telling a story the court and the city can follow without getting lost. Act 1 is about a boy and his mother. Act 2 is about power and how it behaves when it thinks no one is looking. And Act 3? Amanda asked. Jasmine's gaze slid to the photo still face down in the drawer. "Act 3 is about blood," she said. "Who had it? Who stole it? And who it returns to when the receipts come due." Outside, a siren wailed and faded. A train rattled somewhere under the street. The city kept moving, indifferent and electric, while two women on opposite sides of the river counted the same 48 hours for very different reasons. The lines were drawn now. Next came the test of who had built their ground well enough to stand when the storm arrived. By Monday morning, Kings County Supreme Court looked like a dam holding back a river. Cameras clustered on the steps, microphones bloomed like tall weeds, producers rehearsed pronouncers, Blackwood, as in the tower. Inside, a clerk posted a printed notice on the courtroom door, in R.E. Tyler W., all proceedings sealed. No recording. No live stream. Jasmine arrived early with two lawyers from Morrison, Caldwell and Pierce, Priya Menon, compact and surgical, and Luis Ortega, all patience and steel. Aunt Helen walked beside them carrying a thin casebook and the calm of tenure. Dr. Michael Chun trailed with a banker's box, the corners reinforced with tape. Tyler was not there. A sitter from their church had taken him to the park with a dinosaur and a bag of grapes because 4-year-olds deserve parks on Mondays. Victoria Blackwood arrived 5 minutes later, flanked by Richard Thornton and a junior associate straining under a leather portfolio, plus a PR handler who stopped at the threshold when he saw sealed. David Chun, Victoria's chief of staff, stood back against the wall, tablet in hand, scanning emails with the alert fatigue of a man who knew both sides of a story and didn't like either. Judge Marion D'Angelo took the bench at 9:02, no robe theatrics, just reading glasses and a gaze that pinned the room to its chairs. "Good morning. This is a family matter involving a minor. It is sealed. Counsel, I have read your papers, the preventive petition, the affidavits, the motion to quash, and the respective exhibits. We will proceed efficiently. Ms. Menon, you're up." Priya rose. Your Honor, petitioner seeks three things. First, a temporary restraining order enjoining respondent Ms. Blackwood and anyone acting on her behalf from contacting Ms. Washington or her child outside counsel to counsel. Second, an expedited DNA test under CPLR 3121 to establish paternity. Third, protective measures, appointment of a guardian ad litem for the child and a standing order that socioeconomic disparity not be used as a proxy for best interest. She slid a binder to the clerk. Exhibits A through J support stable placement, medical records, preschool reports, housing inspections, and affidavits from employers and neighbors. Judge D'Angelo flipped a tab. And Exhibit K. Priya didn't blink. A recording made by Ms. Washington of her meeting in respondent's office last Thursday. Ms. Washington discloses the recording in our affidavit and consents to its use. It reflects a monetary offer in exchange for custody. Thornton was on his feet. Objection to Exhibit K under New York's wiretap. Overruled, D'Angelo said without looking up. One-party consent state. I know the statute, Mr. Thornton. I taught it. The clerk pressed play. In the hushed room, the audio was uncomfortably intimate. Victoria, $200,000 to start. He comes to live with me. Weekends for you. Jasmine, are you trying to buy my son? Victoria, he is my grandson. Blood of my blood. A click. Silence. The judge closed the binder and folded her hands. Mr. Thornton. Thornton kept his voice smooth. Your Honor, that clip is truncated. My client was attempting to create structure in a difficult situation, not purchase a child. The petitioner has marshaled press to inflame this matter, and we object to turning a sensitive question into a spectacle. As to relief, there is no emergency. There is, however, an undeniable disparity in resources. The child's prospects, education, health care, stability, are unquestionably superior in my client's care. Luis stood. Prospects, he repeated softly, are not a constitutional currency. D'Angelo's pen tapped once. Mr. Thornton, New York law is clear, best interest is not a beauty contest between bank accounts. As to your no emergency, your client's recorded conduct suggests otherwise. Thornton pivoted. We will agree to an expedited DNA test. Good, D'Angelo said. On my order. Sample collection today for the child and within 48 hours for the putative grandmother. If paternity is established by relation, we'll address legal status and standing on return. Priya added, we also ask that the court admonish both parties against weaponizing CPS. Anonymous complaints are often used as harassment. D'Angelo glanced over her glasses. You read my mind. This court orders, no CPS calls absent a good faith basis grounded in personal knowledge. Any bad faith use will result in sanctions. It is 2025, counsel, we are done with that game. Victoria sat very still, only a faint tightening at her jaw. It wasn't fear. It was recognition, she had just been measured. Finally, the judge said, status quo is preserved. The child remains with Ms. Washington pending further order. No direct contact by Ms. Blackwood. All communication through counsel. Guardian ad litem appointed, name to follow by close of business. Return in 14 days. Everyone understands? Heads nodded, some more stiffly than others. Good. We are adjourned. The gavel didn't fall. It didn't need to. The room exhaled. In the corridor, the sealed case bled into the unsealed world. Reporters waited at the far end like weather. Thornton steered Victoria toward a side exit. David walked a step behind, watching his phone. An SEC email had escalated from routine to follow-up request. He slid it into a folder in his mind marked later and watched his boss's profile, immaculate, opaque, carved from a lifetime of being first. Statement, the PR handler whispered. Family matter, Victoria said, voice even. We respect the court and ask for privacy. She didn't slow for cameras. Across the hallway, Priya and Luis collected signatures in the clerk's office. Jasmine sat on a wooden bench under a portrait of a long-ago judge and texted the sitter, all okay. Be back by lunch. Dinosaur hugs. Aunt Helen stood sentinel, unflustered by the fact that the most powerful woman in the building had almost certainly just tried to buy a child on tape and still carried herself like marble. 2 weeks, Jasmine murmured. 2 weeks to shore the foundation you've already built, Helen said. Not to build a castle. Castles invite sieges. Foundations survive them. Amanda, who'd observed from the last row with a press pass she never flashed, walked past without stopping, a ghost moving toward daylight. She didn't need quotes, she had a timeline. By late afternoon, the first countermove arrived, precisely as predicted and just as sloppy as fear makes people. A CPS caseworker, cheeks pink from the cold, knocked on Jasmine's door holding a thin file. Anonymous call, she said, apologetic, eyes already scanning the tidy room. We have to check. Jasmine stepped aside, calm as if she'd been expecting company, because she had. On the console table, a copy of Judge D'Angelo's order sat under a magnet clip. On the bookshelf, a laminated page listed emergency numbers, pediatricians, and allergies. Tyler streaked through the living room with a cape made from an old pillowcase and a stegosaurus roar. May I ask who reported? Jasmine said gently. I'm not permitted to disclose that, the worker said, reflexively, and then, less formally, but I've been doing this long enough to know a weaponized call when I see one. She checked the fridge, labeled bins and cut fruit, the bedroom, fresh sheets, nightlight, the bathroom, child lock on the cabinet, and crouched to talk to Tyler about his favorite book. When she left, she photographed the court order for her file and shook her head. You'd be surprised how often people with resources use us like a cudgel. I'll close this out. The door shut, Jasmine leaned her forehead against it for one long breath. Then she took out her notebook and wrote the time, the name, and 3 short words. They started small. That night, Metropolitan Journal went live with part 1 of Amanda's series at exactly 8 p.m., right when the city settles onto couches and pretends not to be scrolling. The headline was cool, precise, the cost of winning, how public contracts fed a private empire. The story made no mention of a child or a custody case. It named no victims and used no adjectives that sounded like moralizing. It did something harder, it laid out documents. Purchase orders tied to shell companies with shared P.O. boxes. Consultant fees that boomeranged back to a family trust. A procurement official's brother-in-law magically qualified to fix elevators in buildings he'd never entered. Each paragraph ended in a link, PDFs, bank wires, emails from domain names that didn't exist until the day before a bid closed. Amanda's editor had given her the space to do it right, and Jasmine had given her the receipts Adrian left, drives labeled in that neat hand, a breadcrumb trail you could walk in court. The piece carried 2 lines at the bottom, SEC declined to comment. Blackwood Industries declined to comment. In a penthouse high above Park Avenue, Victoria read the story standing up, because sitting felt like conceding ground. She recognized dates, names she thought were compartmentalized, and one photo of a lunch she was sure no one photographed. She was neither naive nor innocent, she was, however, careful. It takes a particular kind of preparation to pierce careful. Her phone buzzed. Thornton. We anticipated pressure, he said. We did not anticipate this. We respond tomorrow, Victoria said, eyes on the word shell used like a refrain. We cooperate. We produce nothing voluntarily. We say nothing on the record. Understood, Thornton said. Also, the board's independent director scheduled a call. 7 a.m. She ended the call and crossed to the window. The city glittered, pretended to be immutable. On her desk, a small silver frame held a photo of Adrian at 6, green eyes astonished by a sandcastle taller than he was, hair stuck in wet commas on his forehead. For a moment, the air in her throat went thin. "Careful what you think you're buying," the man on the hush line had warned. She had intended to buy time, resolve, silence. Instead, she'd bought attention. The PR handler texted a draft, "We are reviewing the allegations and will cooperate fully." David texted from the study, "Board at 7. I'll have materials." Under that, a second text he almost didn't send, "We should consider a different posture with Ms. Washington." Victoria stared at those last 8 words until they blurred. A different posture. She typed and deleted 3 replies and sent none. At 10:12 p.m., a doorman 2 neighborhoods away called 911 about a man messing with a building service door. At 10:21, NYPD cuffed a contractor with a Blackwood Tower visitor badge in his wallet and a lockpick set in his pocket at Jasmine's back entrance. The arrest report would later note that the door camera captured him checking the peephole twice and wearing latex gloves. By 10:35, Jasmine had forwarded the police report number to Priya and Luis, copied Helen and Michael, and dropped the clip from her door cam into a folder labeled Retaliation, Preserve. She poured a glass of water with hands that only shook when she set it down. At 11:04, a text from Amanda, "We didn't name her. We never will. Sleep if you can." Jasmine smiled at the phone and at the absurdity of the words, "Sleep if you can," in a week like this. She checked on Tyler, starfish sprawled, face mashed against the dinosaur, breathing soft like a metronome. Then she sat at the kitchen table, opened a manila envelope she hadn't needed until now, and took out a photo. 3 people, Jasmine, Adrian, and between them a pale young woman with careful eyes. On the back, Adrian's hand had written a date and a single word, family. "Not yet," Jasmine whispered to the empty room. "Not until the ground is set." She slid the photo back, shut off the light, and let the city's hum carry the rest of the night. At 7 a.m., the Blackwood board call opened with anodyne pleasantries that fooled no one. At 7:06, an independent director with union roots cleared his throat. "Victoria, I've read the piece and the exhibits. We need independent counsel and a special committee. Also, the SEC has escalated. We can't PR this away." "Form your committee," Victoria said. "We will cooperate. The company is sound." "And the custody matter?" another director asked, softer. Victoria's pause was microscopic. "A private issue." "Nothing is private for us now," the director said. When the call ended, David lingered in the doorway. "Ma'am," he said, voice low, "we are fighting on too many fronts. If there's a way to de-escalate on one." "I don't de-escalate," Victoria said, crisp as cut glass. "I win." She watched him swallow whatever came next. He nodded and left. Alone again, Victoria lifted the silver frame with Adrian's 6-year-old grin and stared until the past crowded the present. She had built an empire out of crisp lines and hard choices, training herself to believe that outcomes were proof of virtue. But outcomes were making a different argument now, and virtue was not in the room to defend itself. Down in Sunset Park, Jasmine laced Tyler's sneakers and tied a double knot. "Park?" he asked, already airborne with hope. "Park," she said, and tucked a stegosaurus into his backpack with the kind of everyday blessing that keeps whole worlds upright. 2 women, 2 mornings, 1 city. The lines were not just drawn anymore. They were being tested, reinforced, and, on one side, quietly rerouted toward a reveal no one on the other side was ready to see. 14 days until the return to Judge D'Angelo. 48 hours until Part 2. And somewhere between the court and the newsroom, a word waited under an envelope flap, patient and sharp. By Wednesday noon, the building at 360, Adams Street hummed with the kind of quiet that means decisions are being made in rooms you can't see. In one of those rooms, no windows, a clock that ticked too loudly, a court nurse snapped plastic vials into a tray while Tyler swung his feet on a vinyl chair and tried to make his dinosaur roar quietly. "Open big," the nurse said kindly. A cheek swab, a sticker shaped like a rocket, a solemn high five. 2 floors up, another nurse swabbed the inside of Victoria Blackwood's cheek with the clinical efficiency of someone who'd collected DNA from CEOs before and knew exactly how to be unimpressed. Victoria's chin lifted a degree higher than necessary. "How long?" she asked. "Expedited," the nurse said. 48 hours. Likely less. Victoria nodded, the gesture barely perceptible, and walked out past a corkboard covered with flyers for housing clinics and supervised visitation. She had never been this close to that part of the courthouse ecosystem. It smelled like fear and antiseptic and paper. David met her at the curb with the car door open and a tablet ready. "Board Special Committee retained outside counsel," he said. "Gold and Berman. They'll want your time." "They can have an hour," Victoria said. "After I meet with Thornton." He hesitated. "And, the SEC issued subpoenas for documents. Procurement, vendor due diligence, family trusts." "Routine," she said. "Not at this volume," he said softly. She stared ahead. "Clear my afternoon." That evening, a woman in her 40s with dark hair tucked into a low bun knocked on Jasmine's apartment door at exactly 6 p.m. "Ms. Washington?" "I'm Anna Rivera, the Guardian ad litem appointed by the court." Her voice was warm but carried the professional gravity of someone whose notes would be read by a judge. Jasmine invited her in. The apartment was what it always was when someone official visited, honest. Toys tidied into bins, plates drying on the rack, the faint smell of cinnamon from a tea Aunt Helen had made and abandoned half-drunk. Tyler barreled into the living room wearing a paper crown and stopped short, shy. "Hi, Tyler," Ms. Rivera said, crouching to his level. "I like your crown. Is it for dinosaurs or kings?" "Dino Kings," he said, as if insulted she didn't already know. He offered her a plastic stegosaurus without preamble. She accepted it with the proper ceremony. Ms. Rivera asked questions without making them feel like tests. What time did Tyler wake up? Who did school drop off? Where did he keep his favorite book? Did he have a nightlight? Had he ever been afraid here? Tyler answered the last one by shaking his head so hard his crown slipped over one eyebrow. Then Ms. Rivera sent him to draw while she spoke with Jasmine at the kitchen table. "Tell me about your support," she said. "Name it. People. Hours. Who shows up?" "Aunt Helen," Jasmine said. "Every Thursday night, and whenever I need court. My church, childcare swap with 2 moms from the nursery. My manager at the diner lets me swap shifts. Dr. Chun, Michael, handles calls when legal things come up at bad times. And my friend Anna at the hotel bar keeps an eye on Tyler if I have to run down to the lobby. We don't do alone with strangers." Ms. Rivera nodded, jotting. "Boundaries are part of best interest." Across the room, Tyler finished his drawing and climbed into Jasmine's lap, sticky marker fingers and all. On the paper, 3 stick figures, one brown, one pale, one with wild curls, and a box with squiggles inside. He labeled it with block letters he was very proud of, family. Ms. Rivera smiled, then tucked the smile away where it wouldn't get mistaken for bias. "I'll visit Ms. Blackwood's residence tomorrow," she said, standing. Same questions. Same notes. Jasmine walked her to the door. "I know what this looks like," she said. "My life on a clipboard." "It's my job to make sure the clipboard is fair," Ms. Rivera replied. "And to remind the court that love is not an amenity." The next morning, the elevator in Blackwood Tower rose so smoothly it felt like not moving at all. Ms. Rivera stepped into a reception area the size of a studio apartment and waited. Victoria appeared with the kind of composed welcome that made people forget she'd made them wait. "Ms. Rivera," she said, extending a hand. "Come in." The penthouse was art gallery immaculate. A wall of glass, a piano no one played, orchids that had never wilted. Ms. Rivera did the same work here that she did in walk-ups and shelters, unmoved by the bouquet of wealth. She asked about routines, caretakers, contingency plans. Victoria provided answers that sounded like prospectuses: private schools with security, a pediatric concierge, an on-call driver vetted within an inch of his life. And when he wakes from a nightmare, Ms. Rivera asked. Who goes? Victoria hesitated a hair longer than she intended. I would, she said. And there is overnight staff. Names? Ms. Rivera asked. Victoria gave them. Ms. Rivera wrote them down without judgment and without hurry. In the corner, a framed photo caught her eye: a boy of 6 on a beach, grinning, hair stuck in wet commas. Adrian, Ms. Rivera said softly. Yes, Victoria said, and for a fraction of a second the marble warmed. He was curious. He once took apart a watch and cried when he couldn't put it back together. I stayed up with him until he did. Ms. Rivera nodded, made a note no one would see, and closed her folder. Thank you for your time. When the door shut, Victoria stood in the hush and listened to the blood in her ears. She had aced 1,000 audits. This had not felt like one of them. At 1:13 p.m., a lab tech in a white coat slotted a printed page onto a plastic clipboard, cleared his throat, and said to no one, well, there it is. By 2:40, Priya had the email and forwarded it to Jasmine with a one-line subject, as expected. The report was the coldest kind of intimate: probability of grandparentage 99.87%. Mathematics, delivered like a hammer. Jasmine stared at the numbers until the characters lost their edges. It was a relief she already knew and a fresh wave she hadn't braced for. She forwarded it to Aunt Helen and Michael, then silenced her phone and went to the park. Tyler climbed a ladder, roared at gravity, and slid down into her arms like it had always been this simple. Across town, Thornton read the same email and adjusted his strategy tree. We stipulate to biological relation, he told Victoria, and frame best interest around stability and opportunity. I do not stipulate to losing, Victoria said. You won't, he replied, lying less to her than to the part of himself that had never factored in a world where wire transfers and velvet invitations didn't decide outcomes. That night at 8 p.m., Part 2 hit. The Family Ledger: How a 1995 Deal Erased an Heir. Amanda's piece did what good journalism does when it has receipts: it didn't tell you what to think, it made you read. It walked through an old partnership reorganization that pushed a cousin, Robert Blackwood, out of the family business on the eve of a lucrative municipal contract. It showed signatures on amendments he hadn't understood and a notary public who'd later lost her license. It linked that to a scholarship fund quietly shuttered, a trust dissolved, and a line that went from capital letters to silence. At the bottom, quietly, Robert Blackwood died in 2017. Sources confirm he had one daughter, Jessica. No last name. No current address. No photos. Just a name and a year, dropped like a pebble that sinks and ripples at the same time. In the Park Avenue penthouse, Victoria read the word Jessica and felt the room tilt. She had not thought that name in years. A summer with lake water and shouting, a fight behind a closed door, a cousin who hadn't understood that business is a Darwinian thing and family survives when it obeys. She had told herself 1,000 tidy stories about that era. Amanda had just cut the bow. Her phone vibrated. Board, Special Committee requests preservation of personal communications from 1993 to 1997. The SEC, please confirm receipt of subpoenas. Thornton, we need to talk before morning. David, nothing. She wondered what silence looked like on his face. She crossed to Adrian's photo and touched the glass with a fingertip. You would have hated this, she said to a boy who'd once cried over a watch. The glass stayed cold. At 10:22 p.m., David Chun stood under the iron ribs of St. Bartholomew's portico and checked the time like it could slow the world. A figure stepped out of the shadow, tall, tweed coat, a messenger bag. Dr. Michael Chun. Cousins who saw each other twice at weddings and then again here because the city arranged it. You sure you want to do this? Michael asked, no small talk. I'm sure I can't not, David said. He didn't hand over anything. He didn't carry anything that could be called a leak. He did what conscience lets a man do when he works for power and knows where the stairs are. The archive you want isn't in Delaware, he said. It's in Westchester. Off-site storage. Unit registered to a Blackwood charitable foundation that doesn't file returns anymore. Key code ends in 42. He paused. If anyone asks, you found it in the Secretary of State records. Because you did. If you knew what to look for. Michael studied him. This helps a child. That's the only sentence I can say out loud, David replied, and exhaled for the first time that week. Be careful. Always, Michael said, and vanished into the city like a page turning. By Friday morning, Ana Rivera filed a preliminary report with Judge D'Angelo. Child appears bonded, safe, and thriving in current placement. The sentence carried only 15 words. It weighed a ton. At 11 a.m., the lab courier delivered a hard copy of the DNA to Chambers. At 11:12, D'Angelo issued a terse order, grandparentage established to a high degree of probability. Status quo maintained. Expanded protective order. Thornton called to complain about tone. The clerk said the judge would let the order speak for itself. At noon, Michael and Priya drove up a strip of undistinguished storage buildings in Westchester and found Unit 3F with a keypad that didn't look 25 years old but was. The code worked. Inside, banker's boxes, a garment bag with a tag from a tailor Adrian had liked, and, on a metal shelf, a shoebox sealed with an old strip of masking tape marked in Adrian's precise hand, Jessica, personal. They didn't open it there. They logged it, photographed it, sealed it into a larger tamper-evident bag, and drove back to the city very carefully. Back at Jasmine's, the living room became a legal lab. Gloves. A clean mat. A camera pointed at a ruler and a date card. They cut the tape. Inside, a hairbrush with fine blonde strands caught in its teeth, a folded letter creased to transparency, a Polaroid of 3 kids on a lake dock, Adrian, Jasmine, and a girl with careful eyes looking straight at the camera. On the back, Adrian had scrawled in his not-quite-loose script, family, even when we don't say it out loud. Michael's face changed very slightly, the look scholars get when a footnote turns into a source. We can run mitochondrial comparisons against the cousin line, he said. We'll need consent from Robert's sister if she'll give it. But even without, this substantiates identity. Chain of custody is Adrian's handwriting. Courts understand dead men's careful habits. Priya lifted the letter with tweezers. 2 lines, written in a hand that pressed hard, if anything happens, don't let them erase me. Make sure my son knows who I was. J. Her son, Priya murmured. Not her secret. Jasmine stood very still, one hand over her mouth, the other on the table, grounding herself. She had been waiting 3 years to exhale this truth into a room where it would be believed. She didn't cry, tears wasted water. She nodded once to no one in particular and said, "We file under seal Monday." "And we don't leak," Amanda added from the doorway, as if answering a thought. "I tell the story that forces the system to look where it didn't want to, but the boy's blood is the court's business. When the time is right, the public will learn what the law already knows." In that order. Jasmine met her eyes. "Thank you." Amanda shrugged. "It's called ethics. Rare creature, but not extinct." Friday night, an envelope slid under Victoria's door. No return address. Inside, a copy of Judge D'Angelo's order with the new line about grandparentage established, and beneath it a photocopy of an old family photo, Robert, laughing, a little girl on his shoulders, lake water in the background, the summer before everything got efficient. Someone had circled the girl in red pen and written in a neat, unfamiliar hand. "You forgot that blood keeps records." Victoria sat down very slowly. The city outside her window was glittering and loud and far away. She set the photo next to Adrian's 6-year-old beach picture and left them there, the past staring across the desk at itself. Her phone lit up with 2 calls she didn't take and 1 text she did read: bored, Monday. Bring counsel. She typed a reply, I will, and then did a thing she hadn't done in years. She turned off her lamp while it was still early and walked through her apartment without checking the locks. In Sunset Park, Jasmine tucked the shoebox into a safe she could afford because of extra shifts and the kind of friends who lend you money without making you owe them. Tyler slept with the paper crown askew and the stegosaurus under his arm, as if the world had always welcomed brave things. On Judge D'Angelo's desk, a file grew heavier by the hour with orders and notes and a small yellow sticky that said, in the judge's plain hand, remember, best interest equals present tense, not potential. And somewhere between a penthouse and a walk-up, the city inhaled and held it. Next week would be louder, subpoenas served, motions filed, a courtroom where a name spoken under seal would change the geometry of power. For now, the blood had started to speak. The question was who would learn to listen before it was read aloud. Sunday afternoon, Manhattan wore that late winter light that makes glass look honest. In the corner booth of a quiet museum cafe, Dr. Michael Chun sat across from a woman in her 70s with a cane, a Goodwill coat, and eyes that had decided to stop being fooled a long time ago. I'm Eleanor Shaw, she said, offering a steady hand. I was Eleanor Blackwood before I married. Robert was my little brother. Michael nodded. Thank you for meeting me, Ms. Shaw. Call me Ellie, she said, and the corner of her mouth lifted. No one's called me that since, well, since before things got efficient. He explained, carefully, what the court would need and why. Eleanor listened without interrupting, then opened her purse, removed a small leather case, and set it on the table. I don't have much strength left, she said. But I have this. She tapped the case. And a memory that doesn't forgive easily. My brother had a daughter. Jessica. We lost her in the ledger, not in the heart. She signed the consent form with neat, old-school cursive, then let the nurse swab her cheek. If this helps a child, she added, then some of what was stolen comes back the right way. Michael felt something unprofessional sting behind his eyes. It will, he said. Thank you. Monday 7 a.m., Blackwood Tower, 62nd floor. The board's special committee assembled around a table that had seen 3 recessions and too many lunches that pretended to be meetings. Outside counsel from Gold and Berman took the head seat like a meteorologist with a storm map. We're opening a formal internal investigation, the lawyer said, crisp and bloodless. SEC subpoenas are broader this morning: vendor due diligence, procurement communications, personal devices for certain executives. A beat. They include yours, Ms. Blackwood. Victoria's posture didn't move. We'll cooperate, she said. After today's quarterly prep. No, the lawyer replied gently. Now. Preservation measures first. Devices collected by noon. You'll be scheduled for a proffer. You're asking me to surrender my phone, Victoria said, as if clarifying the spelling of her name. I'm advising you to protect the company by cooperating fully, the lawyer said. We also recommend you step aside as CEO pending the outcome. A hush rippled. The independent director with union roots folded his hands. This isn't punishment, he said. It's governance. The business can't steer while the captain's answering questions to 3 agencies. Victoria's glance flicked to David. He didn't look away. If you step aside voluntarily, he said, you control the message and the horizon. I do not step aside, Victoria said, each word finding its chair. I built this company. I will not let a headline and a rumor decide leadership. The lawyer's expression didn't change. A motion to remove can be brought to a vote. Bring it, Victoria said. 10 minutes later, after a roll call that felt nothing like democracy and everything like drift, the committee voted, temporary leave, with pay, interim CEO to be named by close of business. The resolution sounded administrative. It wasn't. It moved the center of gravity 6 inches to the left. Victoria stood. "I'll have my counsel coordinate logistics," she said. Her voice was steady, her knuckles were white on the back of the chair. "We're not done." In the hall, David matched her stride. "I'll coordinate collection," he said. She stopped. "Did you know they had the vote counted before I walked in?" "Yes," he said. Honesty was the only currency he still respected. "That's how these things work." She studied him as if he'd become a new species. "Find out who's feeding SEC and the press," she said. Quietly. He nodded once. He didn't ask, "What if it's the truth itself?" At 10 a.m., across the river, Priya and Luis filed under seal in Judge D'Angelo's chambers, verified petition to establish parentage, adjunct, and motion for protective relief. Exhibits included the grandparentage report, the Eleanor Shaw consent swab, chain of custody photos from the Westchester unit, a lab intake for the hairbrush, and, tucked behind a tab the judge would linger on, the Polaroid of 3 kids on a dock and the 2-line letter that punched harder than affidavits ever do. The clerk glanced up. "Rough week," she murmured. "We prefer accurate to easy," Priya said. At 11:30, Judge D'Angelo held an in-camera conference with counsel. Thornton pressed to delay. "We're entitled to challenge admissibility." "You are," D'Angelo said, "and you will. But biology is not a press release. The court takes judicial notice of common methods of mitochondrial comparison and of the probative value of chain of custody evidence originating with a deceased putative father. I'll set a briefing schedule." Meanwhile, she tapped the gal's preliminary report, "Status quo continues, and the expanded protective order remains in force." Thornton tried another angle. "Your Honor, my client has stepped aside as CEO to focus fully on this matter." D'Angelo's eyebrow ticked. "That is a corporate decision outside my jurisdiction. In this courtroom, focus is measured by conduct. I expect both sides to behave accordingly." On the way out, Luis whispered to Priya, "She just told him the robe is immune to spin." "Judges talk in weather," Priya whispered back. That was, "Pack an umbrella." At noon, Ana Rivera made her second home visit of the week, this time to a sprawling stone house in Greenwich where the interim CEO, a competent operator named Sheila Park, had asked to meet Victoria to discuss handoff. It was cordial, clinical. Ms. Park's team took laptops, IT imaged phones, legal produced acknowledgments with boxes for initials. On her way out, Ms. Rivera paused by a hallway table where 2 photos now sat side by side, little Adrian with wet hair and a grin, and a summer photo of a laughing man with a pale little girl on his shoulders, Robert and Jessica. For the first time since this began, Ms. Rivera imagined what reconciliation might have looked like if the past had behaved itself. By 4 p.m., the lab pinged Priya's inbox, mitochondrial DNA consistent with maternal line of Eleanor, Blackwood, Shaw. It wasn't courtroom final yet, Thornton would demand an independent expert, but it moved the needle from story to structure. Michael forwarded the notice to Jasmine with no commentary. She read it standing by the stove while Tyler narrated a dinosaur soap opera on the floor. For 3 years, she built her case on paper and patience. Now the blood agreed out loud. She texted Aunt Helen, it matched. Helen replied in under a minute, of course it did. The truth is stubborn. At 6 p.m., Amanda met a federal source in a coffee shop with bad lighting and perfect anonymity. You didn't get this from me, the agent said, sliding a note across the table, grand jury impaneled. Scope, procurement, FCPA, bank fraud. Underneath, a second line that made Amanda's heartbeat switch tempos, parallel inquiry, suspicious death, 2022, I-95, New Haven corridor. Amanda looked up. You're reopening Adrian's crash. The agent didn't nod. He didn't have to. You didn't get this from me, he repeated, and left with his paper cup. She texted Jasmine a single question, you ready for the part that hurts? Jasmine replied, I've been ready since the night we found the drives. We move when the court moves. Amanda pocketed the note and filed it in her head where names go to become sentences later. That night, Victoria returned to an apartment that felt like a staging area. Devices catalogued and taken. A wardrobe assistant boxing items, for a few weeks. The piano lid closed. She poured a drink she didn't touch and stared at the 2 photos she'd left by the hall table like a dare to herself. Her phone buzzed with an unsaved number. She almost let it go to voicemail, then she answered. Silence breathed for a beat, then a man's voice, the one from the hush line she dialed when she still believed money could bend time. You called me last week, the voice said. You don't want to go down the road you're on. I pay for discretion, Victoria said, brittle. This is a courtesy call. Stay out of my family. A pause long enough to be a threat. Family is why some things happen in the first place, he said, and the line clicked dead. For the first time since this began, Victoria set the glass down with both hands. There are sentences you can't afford to circle back to, that was one. She looked at the door as if it could answer questions and at the city as if it owed her its old tricks. Neither obliged. Tuesday morning, before the city could decide its weather, Jasmine opened her door to find Ms. Rivera on the mat with a small bag. Court asks me to observe one morning routine unannounced, she said with a rueful smile. I brought muffins. Bribery is not in the GAL manual, but I read the room. Tyler accepted Blueberry like a treaty. Jasmine moved through her morning choreography with the competence of a person who'd learned to make 10 minutes behave, clothes laid out the night before, lunch packed, EpiPen checked, toothbrush timer app that made a rocket sound when time was up. Ms. Rivera took notes and sometimes took in something bigger than notes can hold, the way Tyler's hand found Jasmine's without looking, the way Jasmine crouched to eye level 4, no, instead of lobbing it from height. At the door, Ms. Rivera said, Court may ask about extended family contact pending identity confirmation. I won't let a stranger with my child's eyes be a stranger forever, Jasmine said. But contact will follow safety, not sentiment. Ms. Rivera wrote that down verbatim. By afternoon, Priya filed a motion requesting a short in-chambers conference to discuss supervised introduction planning if and only if identity were established to the court's satisfaction. It was cautious and human and read like someone who's watched enough cases go sideways to build guardrails in advance. Thornton filed 3 things in response: a motion to appoint a different GAL, denied the same day, a motion to exclude the hairbrush pending chain of custody testimony, reserved, and a glossy, doomed memorandum arguing that aspirational opportunities should weigh heavily in best interest. Judge D'Angelo penciled a note on the margin: aspirations belong to adults. Best interest belongs to the child. Wednesday, 8 p.m., Metropolitan Journal published a short, surgical update. Board places Blackwood CEO on leave, SEC expands inquiry. No adjectives, just verbs and nouns. At the bottom, as always, the line, Blackwood Industries declined to comment. Victoria read it in a room that had stopped feeling like hers. She drafted a statement 3 times and sent none. On her desk, the photo of Adrian at 6 and the copy of Robert and Jessica stared in their own quiet war. She picked up her phone and opened a text to David, meet 7 a.m. before counsel. She didn't send that either. Instead, she did the smallest honest thing left in the day. She walked to a drawer she hadn't opened in years, took out a worn index card in Adrian's childhood handwriting, things we fixed together, and set it by the photos like a vow she wasn't sure she could keep. Thursday morning, Judge D'Angelo's chambers issued 2 orders, one scheduling expert testimony on the mitochondrial comparison for early next week, another, shorter, more human, directing the GAL to begin drafting a contact plan in the event of a positive identity finding, measured, supervised, paced by the child's needs, not the adult's urgency. Priya forwarded the orders to Jasmine with a single line: we are building lanes, not headlines. Jasmine replied, lanes carry kids home. That night, after story time, Tyler fell asleep with his paper crown half off and the stegosaurus under his chin. Jasmine stood for a long time in the doorway, hand on the jamb, and let herself feel what she usually kept stored neat on a high shelf: fear, hope, the gravity of a boy's future. She texted Amanda, "When the crash comes up, we go slow. Court first." Amanda, "Always. The ink waits for the gavel." Across town, under a different kind of lamp, Victoria wrote out 3 names on a legal pad: Jessica, Adrian, Tyler, and drew a line between each pair like she could diagram her way to absolution. There was a knock on the door. "David, right on time, face careful." "2 minutes, he said. "No counsel." "Say it," she replied. "You can still choose a posture that doesn't break what's left," he said quietly. "The company will survive without you. The boy won't survive being treated like a trophy." She almost fired him. She almost thanked him. "Leave," she said instead, because that was the only verb she could find that didn't admit air. He nodded once and did. By week's end, the city had learned new words, the court had stacked new pages, and the river between a penthouse and a walk-up felt narrower and colder at the same time. What came next would not be gentle: experts on the stand, phones imaged and emails read aloud, a journalist with a note in her pocket about a crash that might not have been an accident. But for the moment, 2 truths held. In chambers, under seal, blood was almost done speaking. And in a child's bedroom in Sunset Park, a paper crown slept crooked on the head of the only person in this story who hadn't chosen any of it, and whose best interest, for once, was being treated like something other than a slogan. Monday's sky over downtown Brooklyn had the pale, rinsed look of paper left in the rain. Inside Part 14, the air was drier, edged with copier heat and the quiet rustle of people trying to be smaller than their stakes. Judge Marion D'Angelo took the bench at 9:01 a.m. 2 easels waited, draped, a court reporter flexed her fingers, the Guardian ad litem, Ana Rivera, sat with a slim notebook and the calm of discretion. "Good morning," D'Angelo said. "We're here on petitioner's motion regarding identity and protective relief." "Counsel, proceed." Priya Menon stood. "Your Honor, we call Dr. Saira Banerjee, Professor of Genetics, Mount Sinai." Dr. Banerjee swore in, straightened a pair of round glasses, and explained mitochondrial DNA the way good teachers explain complicated mercy, slowly, without condescension. Maternal lines. Probability tables. A chart went up, the cheek swab from Eleanor Shaw, the hairbrush from the Westchester unit, the math that stitched them together. "To a reasonable degree of scientific certainty," she said, "the hair originates from a woman in Ms. Shaw's maternal line. Given corroborating documents, that woman is consistent with Jessica Blackwood." Thornton rose for cross, smooth and practiced. "Chain of custody on the hairbrush?" "Originating with a deceased putative father, documented in his hand," Dr. Banerjee said. "Logged, sealed, and processed according to lab protocol." "So you're trusting the dead," Thornton said. "I'm trusting habits," she replied. "Courts often do." A faint smile crossed D'Angelo's face and was gone. Priya resumed, flipping to the second easel. A Polaroid, 3 teenagers on a dock. Adrian, hair in wet commas, arm braced behind him, Jasmine, eyes squinting to joy, between them a pale girl looking dead at the camera. On the back, in Adrian's precise script, "Family, even when we don't say it out loud." "We submit under seal," Priya said, voice steady. "Not for publication. For truth." D'Angelo nodded once, like accepting a gift she wished she didn't need. Ana Rivera rose next with the economy of someone who knows a judge's attention is a resource. "Preliminary findings," she said. "Child is bonded, safe, thriving in current placement. Petitioner demonstrates consistent caregiving, appropriate boundaries, strong support network. Respondent's home offers resources, yes, but the best interest standard is present tense, not aspirational. If identity is established, I recommend a measured, therapeutic contact plan, introductions paced by the child's tolerance, supervised by a clinician, under court oversight." Thornton tried to push the door that had just been measured shut. Your Honor, my client has stepped aside as CEO to focus on family. She can provide opportunities no court can ignore. Courts ignore quite a lot, Mr. Thornton, D'Angelo said mildly. Beginning with speeches. She tapped her pen twice. The record will reflect the expert testimony and the gal's report. The court finds, by clear and convincing evidence, that Jessica Blackwood is the child's deceased mother and that the child is the biological grandson of respondent. Status quo is maintained, physical and legal custody remain with Ms. Washington. The GAL will draft a contact plan. Counsel will confer on logistics. Any violation of the protective order, press, CPS, private investigators at doors, will be sanctioned. We are dealing with a 4-year-old human being, not a corporate asset. Understood? Heads nodded, some in relief, some because there was nothing else to do. Good, D'Angelo said. We're adjourned. No gavel. Just the sound of everyone breathing again. In the corridor, silence met noise. Reporters clustered down the hall past the sealed sign, sniffing whether they couldn't name. Priya and Louise signed for copies in the clerk's office. Jasmine sat on a bench under a portrait of a judge with 1970s sideburns and texted the sitter, "Park after nap. We'll bring grapes." Across the way, Victoria stood with Thornton and David. Her face held, her hands did not. A PR aide edged closer, then stopped when he saw the sealed stamp. Statement, he whispered. No, Victoria said. Not here. David's tablet pinged twice. SEC, Expanded Subpoena, Personal Communications, 1993 to 1997. Gold and Berman, Device Imaging 2 p.m. He filed them in the part of his mind where triage wears a tie. By late afternoon, 2 very different conferences unfolded. In Sunset Park, Jasmine met with Ana Rivera and a child therapist in a room designed to calm, low shelves, beanbags, a fish tank with yellow flashes. They mapped a ladder. Step 1, Tyler sees 3 photos, baby Adrian, Lake Jessica, a current picture of Victoria, and here's a simple story. Step 2, a 10-minute video hello with the therapist present. Step 3, a supervised in-person visit in the therapy playroom with a set of dinosaur figures that Tyler already knew. Step 4, only if Step 3 went well, a short park walk with JL present. Not a race, the therapist said. A process. Jasmine nodded. No titles, no demands. If he calls her the lady for 3 visits, that's the speed. We'll script sentences, Ana said. And we'll write exits. Across town, in a conference room that smelled like institutional carpet and tempered glass furniture, Victoria sat across from 2 assistant U.S. attorneys and a pair of SEC lawyers. Gold and Berman counsel flanked her, carrying the unblinking courtesy of people who bill for steadiness. This is a voluntary proffer, the AUSA said. You're not under oath. Anything you say can be used. Cooperate, and we convey that cooperation. Decline, and we proceed anyway. Victoria stared at the painting on the wall, a bland landscape, all greens, and heard herself say words she did not recognize as her own. I will cooperate, she said. They started with procurement. They moved to shells and gifts that weren't quite bribes until they were. They landed, inevitably, on a year no one wanted to read aloud, 2022. Your son's crash, the AUSA said. I did not have my son killed, Victoria replied, and the room stilled at the nakedness of it. That wasn't the question, the AUSA said gently. This is. He slid a photo across the table, a grainy still of a man in a ball cap outside a rest stop, a week before the accident. Another still, the same man near a garage connected to a contractor later arrested for procurement fraud. The phone number next to the still had 6 digits in common with the hush line Victoria had dialed when she was still a person who believed in shortcuts. Names, the AUSA said. Victoria closed her eyes. It did not count as prayer. I thought I was buying silence, she said. Not blood. Blood is often the hidden surcharge, the AUSA said. Names. She said them. 2. The room wrote. Somewhere across the river, a federal agent stood up from a desk and reached for a jacket. At 8 p.m., Metropolitan Journal published Part 3, Ledger at the Lake. It did not say Jessica, it said a daughter erased. It did not say Tyler, it said a child protected. It printed the scholarship that vanished, the trust that dissolved, the amendment a notary should never have stamped. At the bottom, again, the cold refrain, Blackwood Industries declined to comment. Amanda kept a single unprinted note in her pocket, written in a federal hand, parallel inquiry, I-95 crash. She didn't use it. Not yet. The ink would wait for the gavel. 2 days later, in a room with a mural of a forest and foam logs stacked in a corner, step 1 unfolded. The therapist sat on the rug. Tyler lay on his stomach, chin in his hands, Stegosaurus parked like a patient friend. This is a picture of your daddy when he was little, the therapist said, placing the baby Adrian photo on the mat. Curly hair. Silly face. Tyler giggled on cue. Jasmine's hand rested, invisible, on the edge of a beanbag. This is a picture of your daddy's friend Jessica when she was a kid, the therapist said, laying down the lake photo. She loved the water. She's part of your story. Tyler studied the picture, solemn in a way that made Jasmine want to pull him into her chest and never let the world in again. And this, the therapist said softly, placing the recent photo of Victoria a respectful distance away, is someone who loved your daddy very much. She wants to say hello on the computer next time. We'll be here together when she does. You can say as much or as little as you want. Tyler considered this with the gravity of 4. Can she do dinosaur voices? He asked. We'll find out, the therapist said. You can teach her. Jasmine exhaled, a small, shaken laugh escaping. The room kept its shape. The first video hello lasted 6 minutes and 41 seconds. Victoria sat in a therapist's office on Park Avenue that smelled like lemon oil, hair pulled back, pearls mistakenly left on because habit dresses you before courage does. On screen, Tyler looked exactly like a boy famous only to people who loved him. Hi, he said. Hello, she said, and took the script the clinician slid toward her without looking down. I'm Victoria. Your mom knows me. I loved your daddy when he was little. Do a dinosaur, he said. She blinked, then made a sound she would not have made in any other room in the world. It was a terrible stegosaurus. Tyler corrected her. She tried again. It was worse. He laughed, loud and delighted, and Jasmine, off camera, back straight, breath measured, cried for the first time since the courthouse and didn't apologize to anyone in the room for it. When the call ended, Victoria put her face in her hands for 3 seconds and then did the un-Blackwood thing, she thanked the therapist out loud. That night, the city moved like it always did, impatient, transactional, glittering. Quietly, elsewhere, the other shoe hit the floor. 2 men were arrested on federal warrants, one for procurement fraud and obstruction, one for a conspiracy charge with the words interstate and violence threaded through it in ways that made stomachs drop. A 3rd warrant was sealed. Victoria didn't sleep. Jasmine did, for 3 hours, then woke to Tyler climbing into her bed for the first time in months, not because of a nightmare but because he wanted to ask a question about tails. The next morning, Judge D'Angelo's clerk emailed counsel a draft contact plan for review, sober, staged, aware of human frailty. Priya wrote back 3 tweaks that made it kinder. Thornton wrote back 1 that made it safer for his client. Anna accepted all 4. Gold and Berman scheduled Victoria for a second proffer. SEC scheduled device imaging for an additional family member. The board named Sheila Park permanent CEO. Blackwood Industries stock steadied not because the press got nicer but because the company started doing a thing markets respect, governance. Amanda filed a short update, federal arrests tied to procurement. No comment on any parallel inquiries. She put her phone face down and went for a walk without a destination because even journalists need benches sometimes. Weeks later, in the same playroom with the same mural forest, step 3 began. Tyler wore a paper crown and carried a Ziploc bag of grapes like treasure. Victoria walked in with empty hands on purpose and sat where the therapist pointed. She looked smaller without the tower behind her. "Hi," Tyler said, as if this were just the next channel after cartoons. "Hello," she replied. "I worked on my dinosaur." "Show me," he commanded, magnanimous. She did, and it was still bad, and he laughed again, and something unglamorous and real cracked open inside a woman who had spent her life lacquered shut. Minutes later, he asked without ceremony, "Are you my grandma?" Jasmine's head tipped against the wall for half a second, like a prayer had just walked into the room and sat down. "Yes," Victoria said, voice steady because the therapist's eyes were kind and because some sentences deserve steadiness. "I am. If you want me to be." He considered that. "Do grandmas bring snacks?" "I can learn," she said. The therapist smiled into her notes. Anna wrote a single line in her report that night: adults followed the child's pace. Judges like sentences like that. So do kids. Spring found the city more forgiving than it had any right to be. The SEC kept knocking, the U.S. Attorney's Office kept asking, Gold and Berman kept billing, and a grand jury, somewhere in the zip codes where decisions incubate, kept listening. Victoria kept cooperating and, in a decision that felt like sandpaper against pride, authorized the return of assets to a trust drawn in Jessica's name, with a neutral fiduciary and a board seat held open for a day when Tyler could fill it if he wanted to. It didn't fix what she'd broken, it built a lane where others could walk without falling. Jasmine finished a semester-long evening course, Evidence, of All Ironies, and passed with a grade that made Aunt Helen lift a glass at the kitchen table and say, "To stubborn truth." Dr. Michael Chun went back to his students with a new lecture about how family law is a country where procedure and love share a border and patrol it badly unless someone cares enough to redraw the map. Amanda moved the case to a back burner and wrote about a sanitation worker who saved a block during a blackout because heroism sells fewer ads but saves more souls. Tyler turned 5. At his party in the church basement, he wore a paper crown that had become a habit and played dinosaur charades like it was a sport. Jasmine cut a sheet cake with block letters that said nothing silly, just "Happy Birthday Tyler," because that's what he liked. Anna stopped by and stayed in the doorway, the way gals do when cases are still open but hearts are busy. Victoria arrived late with grapes and no entourage, sat on a folding chair, and watched a boy be happy without imagining how to package it. When the cake was gone and the room had turned back into a room with scuffed linoleum and good acoustics, Tyler climbed onto a chair and yelled, "My family is loud," as if he'd just invented sound. He wasn't wrong. On a warm Tuesday at the end of all this beginning, Judge Marion D'Angelo signed an order that looked like any other piece of paper until you read it slowly: custody, petitioner. Contact, respondent, per therapeutic plan. Protective order, continued. Estate matters, by separate docket. She capped her pen, stuck a yellow sticky on the file that said simply "Good work all," and moved on to the next case where someone's present tense needed tending. Outside, the city went on being itself, impatient, glittering, unfair. Inside, a few people who had been enemies learned to be something less dramatic and more durable, present. Jasmine tucked Tyler into bed and answered his question about tails with a diagram he did not need but adored. Victoria walked home from a visit without calling anyone to report how well she performed being human. David resigned, with a letter that said he needed to work somewhere quieter, and meant truer. Eleanor Shaw got a copy of the court's order in the mail and put it under a magnet that had once held report cards. Aunt Helen graded papers and, between red marks, wrote a note to Jasmine that said only, "You did not let them erase her. Or him. Or you. What the living owe the living is not apology alone or punishment alone. It is lanes that hold when weather hits. It is adults willing to be smaller than a child's best interest and larger than their own fear. It is a paper crown in a playroom and a bad dinosaur impression that gets better with practice. It is truth, written down and funded. Blood spoke. The court listened. And for once, power learned the only lesson worth the tuition: love is not an amenity, it is jurisdiction. ChatGPT can make mistakes. Check important info. Today's story ends here. A billionaire woman went to her son's grave and was shocked to see a black middle-class woman crying with her child in the corner of the cemetery. What unfolded after this moment was so unexpected that it left everyone stunned. Truly, life sometimes hides secrets we cannot imagine. If you found this story touching, please give the video a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and press the bell icon so you never miss our upcoming stories. And let us know in the comments from which part of the world you are watching. See you again in the next story.